1,345 bitcoins. They've been sitting in a single abandoned wallet for 13 years. Not a single transaction. The man who owns them is in Fort Dix federal prison and claims the money isn't his. The state says otherwise. The only evidence is software whose source code no one has ever seen. Not even the judge. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I'm going to tell you the story of a service that laundered money for the entire dark web for 10 years. And I have just one question. Did they put the right man behind bars? I started digging into this matter in the autumn of 2025 when I came across a document that explained a great deal. An amicus brief, a legal submission filed by Chain Argos in support of the convicted man's appeal. It stated in black and white the methods used to link him to the service were unscientific, unverified, unreviewed. I read it 3 times. Then I found the original affidavit from IRS agent Devin Beckett. Then the transcripts of the preliminary hearings. Then the defense's expert reports, which the court had rejected. I spent several weeks piecing it all together. Court documents, witness statements, forum posts, and archived data. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized this case is not just the story of one man. It is a story of how justice works in a world where evidence is generated by an algorithm. I'll be honest with you. When I first started out, I was convinced I knew the answer. If a man had been convicted, he must be guilty. 12.5 years in prison meant the evidence was ironclad. But the more I read, the more questions I had. And not the sort of questions that conspiracy theorists ask, but the kind asked by lawyers, cryptographers, and blockchain analysts whose names appear in academic publications. But first things first, let's start with some background. For those who don't know what a Bitcoin mixer is, imagine a huge swimming pool. You throw your coins into it. Hundreds of other people do the same. The coins get mixed up, and then everyone gets the same amount back, minus a small fee, but from different addresses. The link between the sender and the recipient is broken. You can no longer see where the money came from, nor where it went. For an ordinary person who wants privacy, this is a tool for protection. For a criminal, it's a washing machine. Throw in the dirty laundry, get it back clean. Bitcoin Fog was the first service of its kind on the dark web, and the longest running. It launched on October 27th, 2011, 2 years after Bitcoin itself was created, and it operated for exactly 10 years, until April 2021. During that time, more than 1.2 million Bitcoins passed through it. At the exchange rate, at the time of the transactions, that was around $400 million. But if you convert it to today's prices, we're talking about tens of billions, a figure that makes your head spin. Its clients included the world's largest darknet marketplaces, Silk Road, Agora, Alphabay, Evolution, and Silk Road 2.0. Drugs, identity theft, computer fraud, all of this went through Bitcoin Fog. According to the IRS, around $78 million passed through the service in direct transactions, with known darknet markets alone, and no one knows how much went through indirect transactions. The service operator charged a commission of between 2 and 2.5%. According to investigators' estimates, this brought him around $8 million over 10 years, and that was before Bitcoin's value increased 1,000-fold. 10 years, not a single glitch, not a single data breach, not a single operator arrested. In a world where darknet markets last a year or two on average, where Silk Road was shut down after 2 years, where Alphabay lasted 3, Bitcoin Fog operated for 10. It's as if a bank with no license, no address, and no name had operated for a decade in the heart of New York, and nobody had noticed it. 10 years, not a single glitch, not a single leak, not a single operator arrested, until April of 2021, when a 32-year-old man carrying 4 passports was detained at Los Angeles airport, all in the same name. 2 Russian ones, domestic and international. 2 Swedish ones, also domestic and international. Nothing fake, nothing suspicious, The man had flown to California to enroll on a commercial pilot course. He was planning to start a new career. Instead, he was met by IRS agents who had been waiting for him for 3 years. His name is Roman Sterling, a citizen of Russia and Sweden, 32 years old, no criminal record, no history of crime. His mother works as an assistant in a department at Jönköping University. His stepfather says that Roman is the best son anyone could wish for. His cousins in Boston were prepared to post bail. The prosecution claims that this man ran the dark web's largest money laundering operation for 10 years. But to understand who Roman Sterling is, or rather who he isn't, we need to go back 30 years, to the Russia that many of you remember, or would rather forget. Russia, late 1980s. Somewhere in Voronezh, a boy is born and is named Roman. His father leaves the family when the child is 7. His mother is left alone. This is Russia in the 90s, a country where wages are delayed for months, where people queue for bread, where the word stability sounds like a fantasy. A single mother with a child in a provincial town, no money, no connections, no prospects. Voronezh is not Moscow or St. Petersburg. It is a town people leave, a town where only those who have nowhere else to go remain. But Roman has something else going for him. He's a top student. Maths, physics, chemistry, subjects in which he isn't just good, but stands out markedly from his peers. For him, school isn't a chore, but a refuge. The only place where the rules are clear and the outcome depends on you, not on his father's connections, not on the family's money, on your own wits. His cousin, Alexander Kozakov, would later write in a letter to the court that Roman had been distinguished since childhood by his calm nature and tenacity. A boy who never complained, who solved problems. Remember this detail. It is important. In 2003, Roman's life changes dramatically. His mother marries a Swede named Anders Karlsson. The family moves to Jönköping, a small town in southern Sweden with a population of 130,000, a university, a lake, and peace and quiet. A different world compared to Voronezh. Clean streets, a different language, different rules. Everything was different. Roman is about 15, an age at which moving to a foreign country is either a disaster or a rebirth. For Roman, it turned out to be the latter. He learned Swedish, not over years, but in a matter of months. He obtains citizenship. He enrolls at Per Gymnasiet, one of the city's best schools, offering the International Baccalaureate program. Once again, he excels. Once again, it's maths and the sciences. The program coordinator, Alison Nyberg, will later write a character reference for him for the court. His stepfather, Anders, will say that he always considered him his son. His mother, Tatiana Sterlingova, has also settled in. She obtained Swedish citizenship and took up a post as an assistant lecturer at the School of Health and Well-Being at Jönköping University. A normal life, a normal family, no red flags. At the same time, most of Roman's family, on his mother's side, had emigrated from Russia to Boston back in the 1980s. His cousins, aunts, and his grandmother, Vera Kozakova. The connection with America was strong and enduring. Roman flew to the States regularly, spoke English fluently, and felt at home in Boston. In other words, here's a man with 3 languages, 3 countries, and not a single criminal record. A mathematician by nature, an immigrant who started from scratch twice and adapted twice. A man whom everyone around him describes in the same way. Quiet, intelligent, kind. In 2010, whilst working as a web designer at a small Swedish marketing firm, Roman Sterlingov first heard about Bitcoin, and he was hooked. You have to understand what Bitcoin was like back in 2010. It wasn't an asset worth $100,000. It was an experiment, a digital currency invented by an anonymous person using a pseudonym, which nobody really understood, and which was worth less than $1 a coin. The people investing in it aren't investors. They're enthusiasts, techies, idealists, people who read Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper and see in it not a speculative instrument, but a revolution. Decentralization, freedom from banks, privacy. For a lad from Russia who grew up in a country where the state could take anything at any moment, the idea of money that nobody controls didn't sound like an abstraction. It sounded like salvation. Roman starts buying bitcoins with his salary. He learns how to set up wallets. He travels to Bitcoin meetups across Europe, small gatherings of enthusiasts in cafes and co-working spaces in Berlin, Amsterdam, and Stockholm. 10 to 20 people around a table, laptops, debates about the future of the financial system. Roman helps others set up wallets, buys coins in bulk, and sells them to newcomers, giving them the chance to enter the crypto world without registering on exchanges, which were then unreliable and few in number. In essence, he becomes part of a small but passionate community that believes it is changing the world. And somewhere along the line, according to the defense, Roman becomes aware of a problem that worries him. His Bitcoin address is public. Anyone who knows it can track his balance and transactions. And that means he could become a target. Theft, blackmail, physical assault. For someone who has started to accumulate a significant sum in Bitcoins, this is a real threat. And Roman starts using mixers, services that break the link between his old addresses and his new ones. According to him, this is solely for the sake of privacy, for the sake of security, not for the sake of money laundering. Bear this detail in mind as well, because it is precisely this that will form the basis of his defense in court. And this is where things start to diverge, the moment around which the whole affair revolves. On October 27, 2011, a post appeared on Bitcoin Talk, the main forum of the crypto community at the time. The author signed off with a Japanese pseudonym that translates as Happy New Year. He was promoting a new service, a service which, as he wrote, would mix your Bitcoins with other users' coins and permanently sever the link between your deposit and your withdrawal. To paraphrase, the service would eliminate any possibility of tracing your transactions and make it impossible to prove any connection between deposits and withdrawals. The fee was 2%. The minimum deposit is 1/100th of a Bitcoin. Registration is via Tor only, just a username and password. No email, no name, no traces. The service is called Bitcoin Fog. At that point, Bitcoin is worth around $5. Silk Road has been up and running for 6 months and is gaining momentum. The demand for anonymity is growing by the day. And whoever is behind this post, whomever they may be, understands the market better than anyone else. The prosecution claims that Roman Sterlingov wrote this post. They allege that he not only set up the service, but also ran it for 10 years, collecting commission on every transaction. The defense argues the opposite. Roman was simply one of thousands of users who read this post and decided to try the service to protect their own privacy. As for the domain that the prosecution links to him, he may have registered it as a web designer for a client whose name he no longer remembers. We'll sort out who's right, but one thing is certain. On that day, October 27th, 2011, a tool appeared on the dark web that would change the game for the next 10 years. A tool through which the money from the world's largest drug markets would flow. A tool that would survive the shutdown of Silk Road, the collapse of Alphabet, Operation Onimus, and dozens of international raids. And to grasp the scale of what happened, you need to see exactly who was using this tool and what exactly they were paying their 2% for. Silk Road, Agora, Alphabet. Names that still make DEA and FBI agents cringe. February 2012. Silk Road has been up and running for over 6 months. Bitcoin is trading at around $6. And on the dark web, an economy is taking shape that doesn't yet have a name. People are buying drugs with digital coins. Sellers receive payments that cannot be frozen. Middlemen take their cut. Everything is working. But this economy has one problem. The blockchain is public. Every Bitcoin transaction is recorded in a public ledger that anyone can read. Yes, addresses are anonymous. They're just a string of characters. But if someone links your address to your name via an exchange, a currency converter, or any place where you've shown your ID, your entire history becomes transparent. Every purchase, every transfer, every penny, and not just for the last month. For the entire time the address has existed, the blockchain remembers everything. For the average user, this is an inconvenience. For a drug dealer on Silk Road, it's a death sentence. And it is at this very moment that Bitcoin Fog becomes more than just a service. It becomes infrastructure. The way it worked was elegant in its simplicity. The user would visit the site via Tor. They would register, just a username and password, no verification required. They would send Bitcoins to the specified address. The service would take these coins and add them to a shared pool, along with coins from hundreds of other users. Then, at random intervals, ranging from a few hours to several days, it would send the user the same amount minus the commission, but from completely different addresses, in random installments, to different wallets if the user had specified several. The link between the input and output was severed. Mathematically, the commission is between 2 and 2.5%, plus tips and donations, if the customer is satisfied. According to IRS calculations, over 10 years of operation, this brought the operator around $8 million at the exchange rate at the time of the transactions. But during that time, Bitcoin rose from $5 to $60,000. Those who kept their commissions in Bitcoin rather than cashing them out immediately earned hundreds of times more. Now, who paid that 2% and what for? Its first major client was Silk Road, the legendary online marketplace for drugs founded by Ross Ulbricht. Silk Road operated from February 2011 to October 2013. During that time, it generated approximately $193 million in sales. Heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, LSD, methamphetamine, the entire range of the global drug trade, packaged within an online shop interface complete with reviews and ratings. Silk Road users sent their Bitcoins via Bitcoin Fog to break the chain between a purchase on the marketplace and a withdrawal to an exchange. This was standard practice, not a recommendation, but a rule of survival, because without a mixer, the path of every Bitcoin was transparent. Here the money went to Silk Road, here it came back, here it arrived at the exchange where your passport is on file. 3 clicks, and you're in handcuffs. When the FBI shut down Silk Road and arrested Ulbricht in October 2013, the Darknet economy did not come to a halt. It simply moved on. Silk Road 2.0 Agora evolution. New markets were popping up faster than the old ones were being shut down. And Bitcoin Fog migrated along with them. Or rather, it didn't go anywhere. It simply carried on operating like a public utility, like a water pipe. Markets came and went, but the laundry service remained. Relations with Agora, one of the largest marketplaces of 2014 to 2015, were particularly close. According to court documents, Bitcoin Fog became Agora's official mixer. A message even appeared on the service's website stating that the marketplace was run by trusted associates. Over its lifetime, Agora processed around $221 million in sales, more than the original Silk Road, and a significant portion of that money passed through Bitcoin Fog. Then there was Evolution, a marketplace that, in March 2015, pulled off what is known as an exit scam, stealing $12 million worth of Bitcoins from its users. Then there was Alphabet, a giant that, by 2017, was processing $11 million in sales per month. They were all clients of Bitcoin Fog. They all sent money through his pool. and they all ended up being shut down, but Bitcoin Fog did not. But the markets were only part of the client base. There were others too. Ilya Lichtenstein is the man who, together with his wife Heather Morgan, known online as Razzle Khan, stole $3.5 billion worth of Bitcoins from the Bitfinex exchange hack in 2016. Lichtenstein later admitted that he used Bitcoin Fog to launder part of the stolen funds. Then there was Larry Harmon, the operator of another mixer, Helix, who also worked with Darknet markets and was also convicted. Both of these men testified for the prosecution at Sterling's trial. Both confirmed that they had used Bitcoin Fog, and both said they did not know who was behind it. In December 2013, an incident occurred that cast the service in a completely different light. Sheep Marketplace, one of the Darknet markets, was robbed. Someone withdrew around 96,000 Bitcoins. At the exchange rate at the time, that amounted to tens of millions of dollars. Part of this money was laundered through Bitcoin Fog. This is no longer simply a commission-based business. It is participation, direct or indirect, in the biggest crimes of the digital age. According to the prosecution, around 487,000 Bitcoins passed through Bitcoin Fog directly from Darknet markets, equivalent to approximately $55 million at the exchange rates at the time. Around 165,000 Bitcoins were sent back to the markets, $24 million. In total, through direct links alone, more than $78 million. And if we include indirect transactions, intermediary wallets, and chains that pass through several hands, the sum increases many times over. And all of this involves drugs, fraud, identity theft, and cybercrime. The Ministry of Justice also notes that the service was used by distributors of illegal content. I won't go into details. You know what I'm talking about. Suffice it to say that among Bitcoin Fog's clients was a notorious website, the closure of which was the result of a large-scale international operation. 10 years, Silk Road fell. Agora shut down voluntarily. Evolution ran off with the money. Alphabet was taken down by Operation Bayonet. Hansa too. Dream Market, Wall Street Market, Hydra. They all came and went. But Bitcoin Fog kept on running. Quietly, consistently. No advertising, no interface updates, no grand announcements. Like clockwork. And that perhaps is the most frightening thing about this story. Not the scale of the money, nor the list of crimes, but the fact that someone, a single person or a group of people, for 10 years running every single day, kept a service running that catered to the worst sort of people on the internet, and never once made a mistake, never once was hacked, never once pulled an exit scam, even though they could have walked away with hundreds of millions at any moment. Either this is a remarkable feat of discipline, or remarkable indifference, and this is the defense's version, the service was being run by someone else. And Roman Sterlingov simply happened to be in the wrong place on the blockchain at the wrong time. But in 2019, a new client came knocking at Bitcoin Fog's door. He wanted to launder money from the sale of ecstasy. He wrote this in no uncertain terms to the service administrator. The transaction went through without a single question, without a reply. Without any verification, this client wasn't a drug dealer. He was an IRS agent. The irony of this story is so thick that if someone had written it as a screenplay, the producer would have rejected it for being implausible. The man who had supposedly spent 10 years erasing other people's traces from the blockchain was caught by his own trace. A trace that was 10 years old. A trace he had left on the very day it all began. Let's break down how this happened, step by step, because this chain of events is either a stroke of genius on the part of the investigators or a mistake that cost a man his freedom. It all depends on who you believe. October 2011, someone registers a domain for Bitcoin Fog through a hosting provider. The registration is made under a pseudonym, the Japanese phrase, Happy New Year. Payment was made via Liberty Reserve, a digital currency that was a popular alternative to bank transfers at the time. The service was shut down by the US authorities in 2013, and its founder was convicted of money laundering. But the key point is that Liberty Reserve kept records, and those records survived to be used in the investigation. IRS investigators traced the domain registration payment back to a Liberty Reserve account. This account was linked to a specific email address. They then asked, where did the money in this account come from? The answer led them to the digital payment platform RM Exchange, and the money on RM Exchange came from an account on the Mt. Gox exchange, from a third account registered to an email address on Rambler. And this third account on Mt. Gox received bitcoins from another account on Mt. Gox from the second one, and the second one received them from the first. And this first account on Mt. Gox was registered under a real name, with a real address, with a real phone number, Roman Sterling. On the 3rd of October 2011, he topped up this account with 100 euros. The chain of events is as follows. Euros are converted into bitcoins on Mt. Gox. The bitcoins are transferred through several accounts on the same exchange. They are then sent to another platform, RM Exchange. There, they are converted into dollars. The dollars are sent to Liberty Reserve, and Bitcoin Fog's hosting is paid for using Liberty Reserve. The investigators found something else, IP addresses. On November 24, 2011, the same IP address accessed a second Mt. Gox account, a third Mt. Gox account, and a Liberty Reserve account linked to the Bitcoin Fog domain, all on the same day, from the same device. This meant that all these accounts were controlled by a single person. And finally, a Google account. It was linked to one of the accounts on the BTC-E exchange, which had also received bitcoins from the Bitcoin Fog cluster. A document in Russian was stored in this account's Google Drive. It outlined the steps for the purchasing Liberty Reserve, exactly the same steps that were used to pay for the Bitcoin Fog domain. For the prosecution, it was a perfect chain of evidence. Euro, Mt. Gox, Bitcoins, RM Exchange, Liberty Reserve, the Bitcoin Fog domain, a real name at the first link in the chain, IP addresses connecting the intermediate links, an instruction document on Google Drive. Every element leads to one person, Roman Sterlingoff, but the defense saw this same chain of events in a completely different light. Lawyer Tor Eklund pointed out that there is no direct transaction between Sterling's Mt. Gox account and the address from which the Bitcoin Fog domain was paid for. There's a series of transfers via intermediary addresses, and the fact that Chainalysis software links these addresses doesn't mean that they belong to the same person. The bitcoins could have been sold, exchanged, transferred. Sterling could have sold his coins to someone who then bought the domain, or to someone who sold them on to yet another person who bought the domain. The flow of money is not the same as the flow of control. As for the IP addresses, the defense argued that Sterling could have accessed his accounts for personal reasons, and that the match with the Liberty Reserve account could have been coincidental. For instance, if he had used the same VPN or a shared Wi-Fi connection. As for the document on Google Drive, the web designer could have drawn up instructions for a client who had asked for help with purchasing Liberty Reserve. There was also one fact that the defense emphasized particularly strongly. When Sterlingoff was arrested, all his electronic devices were seized: laptops, phones, notebooks, and on not a single one of them, not a single one, was there any mention of Bitcoin Fog. No server logs, no administrator passwords, no correspondence, no notes, nothing. The man who had allegedly run the dark web's largest mixing service for 10 years left not a single trace of this activity on his devices. The prosecution attributed this to caution. The defense attributed it to innocence. But that wasn't all. In 2019, IRS agents carried out a so-called sting operation. An undercover agent registered on Bitcoin Fog and sent a message to the service administrator, stating explicitly that he wanted to launder the proceeds from the sale of ecstasy. The transaction was processed, no reply, no questions asked, no checks whatsoever. The money passed through the mixer and came out clean. For the prosecution, this proved that Bitcoin Fog had deliberately provided services to criminals. For the defense, it showed that the service operated automatically, without manual oversight, and that the lack of a response from an administrator suggested that no one was actually in control, or perhaps someone else was. And so, in April 2021, 2 years after the sting operation, Roman Sterlingoff flew into Los Angeles. He planned to enroll on a commercial pilot course, a new life, a new career. By this point, his crypto investments, according to him, had largely been spent. He tried his hand at trading. It didn't work out. He launched a VPN service. It failed. He set up a music studio. It didn't take off. He tried to become a life coach. That didn't pan out either. A man who, according to the prosecution, made millions from Bitcoin Fog commissions, had tried his hand at 4 failed businesses by the age of 32 and flew to America to train as a pilot. IRS agents were waiting for him at the airport. They had been tracking him for 3 years, ever since the sting operation. They knew when he would buy his ticket. They knew when he would land. They waited until he set foot on American soil. Because until that moment, Sterling had never been within US jurisdiction long enough to be arrested. He was arrested. He was charged with money laundering, conspiracy to launder money, operating an unlicensed money business, and transferring money without a license. He was remanded at the Northern Neck Regional Jail in Warsaw, Virginia. His passports were confiscated, his assets were frozen, bail was refused, and Roman Sterlingoff said one thing: "It wasn't me. I didn't run Bitcoin Fog. I was a user, just a user." The court did not believe him. But what happened in the courtroom proved to be no less controversial than the chain of transactions itself. This was because the prosecution's main evidence was software that nobody, neither the defense nor independent experts, nor even the judge, was able to examine from the inside. It was called the black box, and this black box decided a man's fate. On February 29th, 2024, Judge Randolph Moss handed down a ruling that changed the course of cryptocurrency forensics. He ruled that the Chainalysis reactor software was admissible as evidence in court, reliable, scientific, sufficient to convict a person. This was the first time that blockchain analysis had passed the so-called Dober test, the federal standard for the admissibility of expert evidence in US courts. And this ruling does not concern Roman Sterlingoff alone. It concerns everyone who has ever made a transaction in Bitcoin. But let's take it one step at a time, because what was happening in the courtroom was no less dramatic than the investigation itself. Sterlingoff's trial began in February 2024 at the District Court for the District of Columbia. The prosecution's case rested on 3 pillars. The first was a chain of transactions from 2011, which we have already examined. Euros on Mt. Gox, Bitcoins via intermediary addresses, Liberty Reserve, payment for the Bitcoin Fog domain. The second was IP addresses linking Sterlingoff's accounts to those associated with Bitcoin Fog. The third is the blockchain analytics tool Chainalysis Reactor, which clustered over 575,000 Bitcoin addresses as belonging to Bitcoin Fog, and showed that 43 transactions from 144 unique addresses within this cluster were sent to Sterling's personal accounts. The defense fought hard for each of these pillars. Regarding the transaction chain, lawyer Tor Ekelund insisted that there's no direct link between Sterlingoff's account and the address that paid for the domain. There's a series of transfers. The Bitcoins could have been sold, exchanged, or transferred to a third party. The flow of funds does not constitute proof of control. Based on IP addresses, the security team pointed out the possibility of shared networks, VPNs, or coincidental matches, but the main battle centered on the third pillar, Chainalysis Reactor. What is Reactor? It is commercial software developed by Chainalysis, a market leader in blockchain analytics. It is used by the FBI, the IRS, the DEA, Europol, and dozens of other agencies around the world. Reactor analyzes the blockchain and groups addresses into clusters. That is, it determines which addresses belong to the same owner. It does this using 3 types of heuristics. The first is known as joint spending. If 2 addresses participate in the same transaction as inputs, they most likely belong to the same owner. The second is behavioral clustering, based on patterns of behavior. The third is direct attribution, based on data from exchanges and partners. The problem is that the algorithms behind the second and third heuristics are proprietary. They're closed source. Their exact logic is a trade secret of Chainalysis. Sterling's defense team requested access to Reactor's source code to check for errors. The court refused. Judge Moss ruled that disclosing the code would pose a threat to law enforcement activities. If Sterling is indeed the operator of Bitcoin Fog, he would gain insight into exactly how the surveillance tools work. The defense received only a description of the methodology, but not the code itself. No formulas, no parameters, no threshold values. In essence, they were told, here's the black box, here's the result, take our word for it. But the defense did not give up. They hired their own expert, Jonelle Still, Director of Investigations and Intelligence at CipherTrace, a subsidiary of MasterCard and a direct competitor of Chainalysis. Still conducted an independent analysis and reached conclusions that stunned the courtroom. She stated that Chainalysis's tools had been used incorrectly, that blockchain analytics were insufficient as a primary source of evidence, and that their use had led to Sterling's unjustified arrest. Still explicitly recommended that Chainalysis data should not be used in this case, or in any other, because the software had not been audited, the model had not been validated, and the data collection chain had not been documented. Lawyer Eklund seized on this. He called Chainalysis junk science. Sterling's supporters in the crypto community went further. They dubbed Chainalysis the Theranos of blockchain forensics, drawing a parallel with a scandal-hit startup that promised a revolution in blood testing and turned out to be a fraud. But then something strange happened. CipherTrace withdrew the Still report. The company stated that the data used in the report was unverifiable and unauditable. No detailed explanations, no specifics. The defense lost its key expert just a few weeks before the trial. The crypto community saw this as pressure from MasterCard, CipherTrace's parent company, which didn't want to fall out with the US authorities. Others said that the withdrawal of the report in itself proved the unreliability of the entire blockchain forensics industry. And shortly afterwards, CipherTrace ceased to exist altogether. The company's website began redirecting to other MasterCard products, as if the company had never existed. But the blows to the defense did not end there. The most devastating one came from within. At one of the preliminary hearings, Roman Sterlingov gave evidence under oath. The discussion centered on his assets, bitcoins frozen on the Kraken exchange. The prosecution asked where these bitcoins had come from. Sterlingov replied that they had passed through Bitcoin Fog. For mixing, for privacy. He admitted this himself, under oath. In doing so, he confirmed exactly what the prosecution was trying to prove using Chainalysis, that his Kraken account was linked to Bitcoin Fog. He wanted to explain that he was a user, not an operator, but legally, he gave the prosecution precisely the link they needed. In his ruling, Judge Moss explicitly noted that the defense itself had provided evidence of Reactor's reliability. Through Sterling's testimony and the evidence of its own expert Still, who, prior to the report's retraction, confirmed that the underlying clustering methodology is also used by CipherTrace. There were other witnesses too. Ilya Lichtenstein, the man who stole $3.5 billion from Bitfinex, confirmed under oath that he had used Bitcoin Fog to launder part of the stolen funds. Larry Harmon, the operator of the rival mixing service Helix, also confirmed that he had used the service. Both cooperated with the prosecution as part of plea deals in their own cases. Both said they did not know who was behind Bitcoin Fog, but both confirmed that the service worked, was reliable, and was used regularly. On March 12, 2024, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. guilty on all counts: money laundering, conspiracy to launder money, operating an unlicensed money transfer business, transferring money without a license. The prosecution sought a 30-year sentence. Prosecutor Christopher Brown described it as a crime of staggering proportions. The defense asked for no more than 7.5 years. Eklund pointed out that there was not a single service log or witness statement that placed his client behind the controls of Bitcoin Fog. On November 8, 2024, Judge Moss handed down the sentence: 12 years and 6 months in a federal prison, confiscation of $395,563,025.39, plus $1,760,000 in seized crypto assets, plus the full transfer of the Bitcoin Fog wallet containing 1,345 Bitcoins, over $1,300,000. At the sentencing, Sterling said briefly, "I am sorry for any harm that may have resulted from my actions." No admission of guilt, no apology. A carefully worded statement from someone who continues to claim that he was convicted for someone else's actions. But the story doesn't end in the courtroom, because on November 20th, 2024, Tor Ekelund lodged an appeal. When I began this investigation, I thought I would find the answer. Guilty or not, black or white. But the deeper I delved, the clearer it became to me that there are no simple answers in this case. There are only questions, and each one weighs heavier than the last. This is what's happening right now. As you listen to this, on September 17th, 2025, lawyer Tor Ekelund filed an appeal with the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. 20,000 words, every single one of them challenging the admissibility of Chainalysis Reactor as evidence. 5 days later, Chainargos, an independent analytics firm, filed an amicus brief in support of Sterling. 6,000 words. In it, Chainargos argues that the blockchain tracing methods used in court were fundamentally unscientific and should never have been presented to the jury. What's more, Chainargos uncovered something else. The original affidavit from the IRS agent, on the basis of which Sterling's arrest warrant was issued, contained an error. The blockchain address had been recorded incorrectly. One letter differed from the actual address. An address beginning with a specific combination of characters had been confused with another. An error in a document signed under oath. It was corrected in court. The agent used the correct address in his testimony. But Chainargos asks a fair question. If there was an error in the case's foundational document, in how many other places might there have been errors that nobody noticed? In February 2026, there was an unexpected twist. Chainalysis, the very company whose software formed the basis of the prosecution's case, filed its own amicus brief, but not in support of Sterling, in support of the prosecution. Chainalysis asked the court to allow it to participate in the proceedings on the state's side. The defense objected. On March 9th, Eklund filed a 3,500-word response challenging Chainalysis's participation. On March 16th, Chainalysis replied, and on March 19th, the court set a date for oral arguments, May 12th, 2026, just a few days from now. As you listen to this, I want you to understand the scale of what is at stake. This isn't just one man's appeal. If the court decides that Chainalysis Reactor is not reliable evidence, it won't just be the Sterling case that collapses. The legal precedent will collapse. Every case in which blockchain analysis has been the main evidence will be called into question. And there are hundreds of such cases, thousands, all over the world. An FBI agent at Sterling's trial admitted that Chainalysis is used around 1,000 times a day. Not by him personally, but by the FBI as a whole. 1,000 times, every day. And if the court upholds the verdict, the precedent will be cemented. Blockchain analysis will then become a standard tool for the prosecution in any cryptocurrency case. Without disclosure of the source code, without an independent audit, without a known error rate, because the judge has already decided that this is sufficient, Meanwhile, Roman Sterling is serving time at Fort Dix Federal Prison in New Jersey. He writes, his essay on life behind bars was recently published in The Rage. He describes prison life through the eyes of a man who still considers himself innocent. His mother, Tatiana, continues to work at Jönköping University. His stepfather, Anders, is waiting. His cousin Alexander in Boston is still ready to help. The family has not turned their backs on him. And the Bitcoin fog wallet, containing 1,345 Bitcoins, remains untouched. At the current exchange rate, that's over $100 million. It has been sitting there since the service was last active. No one has withdrawn a single Satoshi. Not before Sterling's arrest. Not since. If he really is the operator, why didn't he withdraw the money while he could? If he isn't the operator, who is the owner? And why is the real owner keeping quiet? I've spent months on this case. I've pored over hundreds of pages of court documents. I've traced every transaction I could. I've spoken to people who understand blockchain forensics better than I ever will. And this is what I've come up with. There are two versions of this story, and both of them are terrifying. In the first version, Roman Sterlingov is a quiet mathematician from Voronezh who actually created Bitcoin fog. He spent 10 years at the helm of the dark web's largest money laundering operation. He knew that money from drug dealers, fraudsters, and people whose crimes I don't want to speak of aloud was flowing through his service, and who continued to work because money, inertia, and the illusion of invulnerability proved stronger than his conscience. In this version, he received a well-deserved prison sentence, and 12.5 years is still not enough. In the second version, Roman Sterling is an early Bitcoin enthusiast who bought coins with his salary, used a mixing service for privacy, and 10 years later fell victim to an algorithm that no one had checked. In this version, he is imprisoned because proprietary software linked his old transactions to someone else's service, and the court did not allow the defense to refute this. In this version, his story serves as a warning to anyone who thinks that blockchain means freedom. I don't know which version is correct, and that perhaps is the most frightening thing. Because if this is how justice works, if you can be sentenced to 12.5 years in prison on the basis of software whose code is classified, whose error rate is unknown, and whose results have not been verified by an independent audit, then the question is not whether the Sterlings are guilty. The question is what will happen when that same software points the finger at you. My name is Mr. Dark Web. The fog hasn't lifted yet, but on May 12th, we might find out a little more. Stay tuned for updates. Every second you spend watching this video, somewhere in the world, a machine is working. It knows who you are messaging, when you are messaging, where you are messaging from, and how many times you do it. That's enough to find you, to imprison you, or to destroy you. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I will tell you why Tor is dying, and how, right before your eyes, a man wanted by the most powerful intelligence agencies on the planet is building a new Darknet, one that scares the world's secret services far more. But to understand why he is building it, you need to know the story that changed everything. In 2019, in Germany, one man became a ghost. He didn't make a single mistake. He didn't leak his email. He didn't use his real name. He never went online without Tor. He communicated only through an encrypted messenger that routed every message through 3 layers of anonymous routing. For 3 years, the German federal police couldn't get to him. They didn't crack a single password. They didn't intercept a single message. They simply did the math. The time a packet entered the network and the time it exited. That was enough. And that specific case is exactly what made me start digging. Because if a man did everything right and they still found him, then the problem isn't the man. The Problem is the system. I spent several months before I pieced together the full picture. Documents from German journalists at Panorama and STRG_F. Findings from the Chaos Computer Club, the oldest hacker organization in Europe. Court records from the Frankfurt District Court. Technical reports from the Tor developers themselves. And the deeper I dug, the more clearly I understood. This isn't a story about one failure. This is a story about how an entire era of digital anonymity collapsed. The man in question is referred to in the documents by the initials Andreas G. He administered one of the largest illegal platforms on the Darknet. I won't name its specific nature. That doesn't matter for our story. What matters is something else. Andreas G was a paranoid, in the best sense of the word. He knew how Tor worked. He knew how intelligence agencies worked. He used the Ricochet Messenger, an application that didn't just encrypt messages, but ran each one through a full chain of Tor nodes. No servers in the middle. No logs. A direct connection between 2 points through 3 layers of encryption. And they found him anyway. The German Federal Criminal Police Office, the BKA, began the operation in 2019. They didn't try to hack Tor, they did something else. They started observing the network nodes themselves, month after month, year after year. The BKA recorded when data packets entered specific Tor nodes in Germany and when they exited. They didn't see the content, they only saw the rhythm, the timing, the frequency, the volume. Simultaneously, they coordinated with Dutch intelligence. The Netherlands provided key data on the server infrastructure used to route the platform's traffic. And then they matched that rhythm with data from the internet service provider. The Frankfurt court ordered the company Telefonica to disclose which subscribers of the mobile operator O2 connected to specific Tor nodes at specific times. And when the two datasets were overlaid, the traffic timings in the Tor network and the connection logs from the provider, one person was at the intersection. Andreas G. from North Rhine-Westphalia. In December of 2022, he was sentenced to a long prison term. When the journalists from Panorama handed the case files over to the Chaos Computer Club, their representative, Matthias Marx, stated it plainly. The available evidence convincingly shows that law enforcement agencies have repeatedly and successfully conducted timing analysis attacks against selected Tor users over the course of several years. Not once, not by accident, systematically. In this investigation alone, journalists found documents regarding 4 successful timing analysis attacks. 4 times, 4 people, 4 times. The system that had been considered impenetrable for 20 years proved powerless. And that is when I asked myself a question that haunted me for the next few weeks. If the federal police of one country, not the largest, not the most technically advanced, could do this, then what are those capable of who have hundreds of times more resources? What are those capable of who watch not a dozen nodes in Germany, but the entire internet at once? The answer to that question turned out to be more terrifying than I had imagined. To understand why the timing attack worked, you need to understand how Tor is built, and why what seemed like a brilliant solution 20 years ago has become its main weakness today. Imagine you want to send a letter so that no one knows who wrote it. You put the letter in an envelope. That envelope goes into another envelope. That one goes into a third. On each envelope is the address of the next intermediary. The first intermediary removes the outer envelope, sees the address of the second, and passes it on. The second removes their envelope, sees the address of the third. The third removes the last layer and delivers the letter to the recipient. None of the intermediaries know both the sender and the recipient at the same time. This is onion routing, the principle upon which Tor is built. When this system appeared in the early 2000s, it was a breakthrough. And here's something few people think about. Tor was not originally created by hackers or activists. It was developed in the depths of the United States Naval Research Laboratory. The American military wanted to protect their own communications on the internet, but they quickly realized an anonymous network used only by the military is useless. If all the traffic comes from people in uniform, it is easy to isolate. You need a crowd. You need ordinary users. and that is why Tor was released to the public. For the first time, an ordinary person could go online in a way that neither the provider, nor the site, nor anyone in the middle could link their real address to what they were doing on the network. Journalists in authoritarian countries gained the ability to contact newsrooms, activists to coordinate actions, whistleblowers to transmit documents. Tor became synonymous with internet freedom. By 2020, more than 2 million connections pass through this network daily. But this system has a fundamental flaw, and it was built into it from the very beginning. Tor encrypts the content, but it does not hide the fact of communication itself. When you send a data packet through Tor, it passes through 3 nodes. Each node removes a layer of encryption and passes the packet along. This reliably protects the content. But here's what Tor does not do. It does not change the time the packet is sent. It does not change its size. It does not add a delay. It does not generate fake traffic. This means that if someone is watching both the entrance to the Tor network and the exit from it, they can match the packets, not by content that is encrypted, but by rhythm, by time, by pattern. I will explain with a simple example. Imagine you are standing at the entrance to a huge shopping mall with 1,000 exits. You cannot go inside, but you see who enters and you record the exact time. Your partner stands at one of the exits and also records the time. If a person entered at 10 hours, 15 minutes, and 32 seconds, and after a strictly defined interval, someone exited from a specific exit, you can assume it is the same person. 1 coincidence is an accident. 10 is suspicious. 100 is mathematical certainty. That's exactly what the German police did with Andreas G. They didn't stand at all the exits. They didn't need to. They controlled enough Tor nodes in Germany to see, with high probability, when traffic entered and when it exited. And the data from the provider, Telefonica, gave them the other end of the thread, who exactly was connecting to those nodes at that time. But here's what really scared me when I was studying this case. The BKA is the police of one European country. They have access to Tor nodes in Germany. Germany, the Netherlands, and the United States operate some of the largest clusters of Tor nodes in the world. This is public information, but the BKA sees only a fragment of the network, a small piece. And now imagine an organization that sees not a fragment, but everything, all the traffic, every packet, every node, every connection on the planet. An organization that has direct access to the backbone channels of the internet, the very underwater cables through which 99% of global traffic flows. An organization that doesn't ask a court to force a provider to hand over data, because the providers give them everything voluntarily, or they don't even know it's being taken. Such an organization exists, and not just one. When I started studying this layer, I stumbled upon documents that changed my entire understanding of the scale of the problem. Thousands of pages of secret materials that, more than 10 years ago, were leaked by a man who became the most wanted whistleblower in history. The very same man who would later appear on the stage at the launch of NYM. But more on that later. Right now, something else is important. What is described in these documents makes the Andreas G case look like child's play. Because if the BKA was watching dozens of nodes in one country, then those I will talk about next are watching the entire internet simultaneously. They see every packet passing through every cable, and they don't need access to Tor nodes. They don't need a court order. They don't need anything at all, because they are already inside. On June 5th, 2013, the world learned that it was being watched, not by individual hackers, not by private companies, by states. On that day, the British newspaper The Guardian published a secret court order, according to which the United States National Security Agency, the NSA, was collecting phone records of more than 120 million subscribers of the operator Verizon. Not selectively, everyone. The numbers of those calling and receiving, the duration of the calls, the location, the time, every day, for months. The next day, the Washington Post and the Guardian struck again. The PRISM program. The NSA had direct access to the servers of 9 of the world's largest technology companies. Email, video calls, photos, documents, chats, connection logs. All of this went into intelligence databases without the user's knowledge. The source was Edward Snowden, a former NSA contractor who copied thousands of classified documents and leaked them to journalists. Over the following months, those documents revealed a scale the world was not prepared for. I studied these materials for weeks, and this was the turning point for me. PRISM is content collection, emails, calls, files. That is what people fear, but that is not the scariest part. The scariest part is what was happening in parallel, and what was spoken about far less. X-Keyscore, a system that allowed an NSA analyst to search the metadata of any internet user on the planet in real time. No warrant, no court approval. An analyst would enter an email address or a name and get the full picture. Who that person talked to, when, from where, through which servers, what sites they visited, what search queries they entered. Not the content, the metadata, a map of connections, a schedule of a life. And then there was Tempora, a program by the British Government Communications Headquarters, or GCHQ. And this is where the scale reaches another level. Tempora tapped directly into the undersea fiber optic cables that carry transatlantic internet traffic. The British intercepted everything, literally the entire stream of data passing through the territory of the United Kingdom. Content was stored for 3 days, metadata for 30. 30 days of a complete record of who contacted whom, when, and from where. And this is not 2 countries, this is an alliance. The Five Eyes, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. 5 nations that have been sharing intelligence data with each other for decades. Snowden's documents showed that the NSA provided the German intelligence agency, the BND, access to the X-Keyscore system. In return, the BND transferred massive arrays of intercepted data to the NSA via a station in Bad Aibling near Munich. Every single day. Germany, the very country whose police would later catch Andreas G., was itself part of the global surveillance machine, and that's only what became known. How many similar agreements remain in the shadows? No one knows. Now let's return to what happened to Andreas G. The BKA monitored several dozen Tor nodes. It took them 3 years to gather enough data. Now imagine a system that sees all traffic entering and exiting Tor simultaneously. Not dozens of nodes, all of them. A timing attack that took the German police years. Such a system could carry out in hours. And this is not theory. Snowden's documents showed that the NSA and GCHQ were purposefully working on de-anonymizing Tor users. One slide from an internal NSA presentation that reached the press contained a headline that essentially said they could not fully de-anonymize all Tor users, but they could find specific people through manual analysis. Manual analysis. For the year 2013. More than 10 years have passed since then. Computing power has grown hundreds of times over. Artificial intelligence has learned to find patterns in data sets that a human would never see. But I want to focus on one thing that bothered me the most. Metadata is not about criminals. It is about everyone. In the year 2021, an international investigation by a group of journalists revealed that Pegasus software, developed by the Israeli company NSO Group, was used by governments to spy not on terrorists and drug traffickers, but on journalists, lawyers, and human rights activists. 37 phones belonging to journalists and activists around the world were infected. Among the victims were people from the circle of the murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. In Greece, investigative journalist Thanasis Koukakis became the first citizen of the European Union, whose phone was confirmed to be infected with predator spyware. He was not suspected of anything. He was simply asking uncomfortable questions. And here we reach the key point. The problem is not that someone is reading your messages. Encryption solves that task. The problem is that someone does not need to read them. It is enough to know who you are writing to, when, how often, from where, at what time of day you are active, how quickly you get a response. Former director of the NSA and CIA, Michael Hayden once admitted publicly, decisions to eliminate targets are made based on metadata, not based on the content of conversations, based on who is connected to whom, when, and where, and metadata kills. And it was with this realization that the problem lies at the level of the network architecture itself, that no encryption will save you from an observer who sees traffic patterns, that a group of European scientists began work on a project that was meant to change the rules of the game completely. I found the first traces of this project in European Commission documents, 2 research grants, the Horizon 2020 program, a total budget of 5 million euros. The project names, Panoramix and Next Leap. Both were launched in direct response to the Snowden revelations. Their goal was formulated in dry academic language, but behind that dryness was an ambition that took my breath away, to create a network in which an observer, even a global one, even one seeing all the traffic on the planet, cannot establish a connection between the sender and the receiver, mathematically, not difficult, not unlikely, impossible. The year 2017, Paris. A scientist named Harry Halpin sits in a cafe with Adam Back, one of the people whose work formed the basis of Bitcoin. They're discussing a problem that Tor did not solve: how to protect not the content but the very fact of communication. How to ensure that even someone who sees the entire network cannot match the input and the output. Halpin is no random person. He worked on web cryptography standards at the W3C, the organization that defines how the internet works. He taught at MIT for years. He studied the limits of existing anonymity systems, and he knew exactly why Tor is vulnerable. Tor transmits packets as fast as possible. That is its advantage, speed, and its curse, because speed preserves the rhythm of traffic, and rhythm is what gives you away. After the conversation with Back, Halpin contacted 2 people without whom this project would not have happened. Claudia Diaz, a professor at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, one of the world's leading experts on anonymous networks, and Aggelos Kayayas, a cryptographer known primarily as the creator of the consensus protocol for the Cardano blockchain. Diaz dedicated her career to studying how anonymity systems are broken. Kayayas knew how to build decentralized systems that work without trusting anyone. In the year 2018, in the Swiss city of Neuchâtel, they registered the company NIM Technologies, and they began to build what Tor could not, a network where a timing attack is impossible by definition. The idea underlying NYM is not new. The concept of mixed networks was proposed by cryptographer David Chaum back in the year 1981, 40 years ago. But back then, the internet was too slow to add delays and fake traffic. Users simply would not have waited. Cypherpunks of the 90s tried to build mixed nodes for anonymous email, so-called remailers, but they did not go beyond niche projects. When Tor appeared in the 2000s, it consciously abandoned mixing and delays for the sake of speed, and it won for a time. But before I tell you how it works, I want to explain what exactly is behind this idea, because without understanding the principle, you will not understand why NYM is not just an improved Tor. It is a fundamentally different architecture. Tor is like a system of corridors. Your data packet runs through the corridors quickly, from node to node, stripping away layers of encryption. Quickly is the keyword. The packet does not linger. It does not cover its tracks. It just runs. And an observer standing at the entrance and the exit can trace its path by the rhythm of its movement. NYM works differently. Imagine not a corridor, but a huge hall where hundreds of people are simultaneously throwing identical envelopes to each other. Your envelope enters this hall and mixes with the envelopes of everyone else, is delayed for a random amount of time. It is shuffled with others. Empty decoy envelopes that look exactly like the real ones are added to the stream. And when the envelope leaves the hull on the other side, the observer cannot tell which of the hundreds of exiting envelopes belong to you. This hull is the mix nodes. Nodes that do not just pass the packet along, but mix it with the packets of other users. They add delay, they change the order. They ensure that the connection between the input and the output is destroyed mathematically. But that is not all. NYM does something no one else has done on an industrial scale. The network generates fake traffic, constantly. Even when you're not sending anything, decoy packets are moving through the network. They are encrypted exactly like the real ones. They have the same size. They pass through the same nodes. The observer sees a continuous stream of data, but cannot distinguish a real message from the noise. It is like trying to eavesdrop on one conversation in a room where 1,000 people are shouting at once, and half of them are shouting on purpose to confuse you. Halpin described the philosophy of NYM in one sentence: we assume the enemy is watching everything, not part of the network, the entire network, every packet, every node, every millisecond, and even in such a scenario, NYM must work. Technically, this is implemented through a packet format called Sphinx. Every data packet in NYM looks identical, same size, same structure, multiple layers of encryption. Each node removes its own layer, but does not know how many layers remain or where the packet is going next. Even if an attacker controls one of the nodes, they only see the previous and the next step, neither the beginning nor the end of the route. And the architecture of the network itself is 5 stages: an entry gateway, 3 layers of mixed nodes, and an exit gateway. The packet passes through each layer, mixing with the packets of other users and decoy packets at each one. The delays at each node are calculated according to a mathematical model, a Poisson process, which makes them unpredictable but statistically optimal. At the heart of this architecture is academic work conducted by Halpin's colleagues through European grants. Anya Piotrowska and George Dinazes from University College London created an architecture called Lupix. It became the foundation of NYM. Lupix combined existing techniques, Sphinx packets, cover traffic, exponential delays, layered topology into one working system. Halpin took this academic model and began turning it into a real network. In the year 2018, Halpin showed his idea to Moxie Marlinspike and Trevor Perrin, the creators of the Signal Messenger, one of the most secure in the world. Their reaction convinced him that the direction was correct. In December of the year 2019, the alpha version of NYM was presented at the 36th Chaos Communication Congress, the largest hacker conference in Europe. The very same organization whose representative would later confirm that timing attacks on Tor are a reality. And in 2021, something happened that gave the project an entirely different weight. Halpin hired Chelsea Manning, a former United States military intelligence analyst, the very whistleblower who spent nearly 7 years in prison for leaking classified documents about military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, to conduct a security audit of NYM, not just a technical audit. Manning is a signals intelligence specialist. She understands how state systems track traffic, not from textbooks, but from personal experience. Her task was to find vulnerabilities in NYM that an ordinary auditor would miss, the very holes through which an intelligence agency analyst could slip a hand. Manning stated it plainly: network traffic analysis methods have improved significantly over the last decade, and she had long been calling for research into alternatives to Tor. NYM, according to her, is one of the few viable alternatives worthy of real development. But I knew that beautiful architecture and big names are not yet proof. Any security system is only as good as the moment it starts being broken. And the main question that haunted me was simple: what if NYM is just another promise that will crumble when it hits reality? I got the answer on April 14th, 2022, in Paris. April 14th, 2022, Paris. Station F, Europe's largest startup campus, located in a former railway depot on the banks of the Seine. The hall is packed. Developers, cryptographers, investors, journalists. On stage, Harry Halpin, and on the screen behind him, a man who cannot be there in person because he is wanted by the most powerful intelligence agency on the planet, Edward Snowden, that very one. Snowden spoke remotely, from Russia, where he has lived since 2013. The man who showed the world the scale of global surveillance was now presenting a technology created in response to what he had exposed. The circle was complete. Snowden spoke about cryptocurrency, about how Bitcoin's privacy is a disaster. But the main thing he said concerned NYM. The problem is at the network layer. And the fact that NYM is trying to fix this gives hope. This is not an advertising slogan. These are the words of a man who understands how the surveillance machine works better than anyone else on the planet, and who put his name on NYM. That same day, the NYM network was officially launched. A live network, not a test net. Real nodes, real traffic, real operators all over the world. But a launch is one thing. Whether it will work at scale is a completely different question. And this is where the most interesting part begins. Because the NYM solves a problem that no one before them had solved. How to force thousands of independent operators around the world to honestly mix someone else's traffic. Why would they do it? Out of altruism? Tor survived for 20 years on volunteers, and that became one of its weaknesses. Volunteers can be pushed out, and controlled nodes can be put in their place. NYM took a different path, an economic one. And this is where the NYM token comes into play. The principle is simple. Mixed node operators must stake NYM tokens to participate in the network. It is their bet, their skin in the game. The larger the stake, the higher the node's reputation and the more traffic passes through it. But the stake is just the entry. The real money is in the rewards. The network automatically checks how well a node mixes traffic. This is called proof of mixing, not proof of work like in Bitcoin, where miners waste electricity solving meaningless tasks. Here, every unit of computational work goes toward a real goal, protecting anonymity. A node that mixes well receives a reward in NYM tokens. A node that slacks off or behaves suspiciously loses part of its stake. In essence, NYM turned privacy into a market. Not charity, not volunteering. Business. A mixed node operator earns money by making you invisible. And the better they do it, the more they earn. Claudia Diaz and Agalos Kayas developed the reward distribution model in June 2022, 2 months after the launch. Kayas brought experience from the Cardano blockchain economy. The system must be self-sustaining, without a central operator, without a single point of failure, without the possibility for anyone to control the network. But tokenomics is not everything. NYM added a mechanism that solves another fundamental problem: how to pay for network access without revealing yourself. Usually when you buy a VPN subscription, you link an email or a card to it, a point of de-anonymization. NYM uses so-called anonymous credentials, cryptographic access tokens that cannot be linked to the user's identity or their payment. You prove that you have the right to use the network, but no node knows who you are. Now let's compare this to Tor. Head to head. Tor. Traffic moves fast without delays. NYM. Traffic is delayed and mixed. Tor is vulnerable to timing attacks. We saw this in the case of Andreas G. NYM breaks timings mathematically. Tor. No fake traffic. If you're silent, your channel is silent too. An observer sees when you're active. NYM. The network is constantly noisy. Your silence is indistinguishable from your activity. Tor. Nodes are run by volunteers. Anyone can set up a node, including an intelligence agency. NYM. Nodes must stake. An economic barrier. An intelligence agency can set up a node, but they would have to risk real money, and proof of mixing will check the quality of their work. Tor. Packets are of different sizes. You can match input and output by size. NYM, all packets are identical. Sphinx format. It is impossible to distinguish one from another, but I must be honest. NYM is not perfect. And here's where I take off my researcher's hat and put on my skeptic's hat. First, speed. Mixing and delays cost time. NYM is significantly slower than Tor. For messengers and file transfers, this is tolerable. For streaming video or everyday surfing, not yet. NYM VPN, released in March 2025, offers two modes: fast, through regular proxy nodes, without full mixing, and anonymous, through a 5-layer mix node, slow, but with full metadata protection. The user chooses what is more important, speed or invisibility. Second, scale. At the time of the NIM 550N launch, the network had over 600 independent nodes in more than 70 countries. In a few months, over 50,000 app downloads. That's not bad for a start, but for comparison, millions of connections pass through Tor every day. NYM is still orders of magnitude smaller, and in a mixed node, the size of the crowd is the security. The more people using the network, the harder it is to single someone out. Third, NYM doesn't support hidden services. Tor has onion sites, those addresses ending in .onion, an entire parallel internet. NYM doesn't offer this. It protects your regular internet traffic, email, messengers, browsers, but it does not create its own darknet in the classic sense. Fourth, it is a young technology. The first full public code audit was conducted by the company Cure53 in 2024. Before that, there were audits by individual specialists, including Manning, but the broad trial by fire, through mass usage, through attacks, through hacking attempts, is only just beginning. The history of cryptography is full of examples where a system that seemed invulnerable collapsed after one discovered error. And yet, when I look at NYM in the context of everything I've learned over the months of this investigation, one thing strikes me most. For the first time in history, someone is building an anonymity system based on the worst-case scenario. The enemy sees everything. Tor never made such an assumption. Tor hoped that the observer would not be able to control a sufficient part of the network. It turned out they could. NYM does not hope. NYM calculates. But one question remains that gives me no peace. A question for which there is no answer in white papers, in audits, or in Snowden's speeches. What if the observer is already adapting? In 1979, David Chaum invented mixed networks. 20 years later, Tor appeared. 20 years after that, NYM. Each turn of anonymity technology was a response to a new turn of surveillance. And each turn of surveillance was a response to a new turn of anonymity. This is not a war with a winner. This is an arms race without a finish line. When Tor appeared in the early 2000s, intelligence agencies did not know how to conduct timing attacks on an industrial scale. By 2013, they had learned. When Snowden exposed Prism and Tempora, the world started encrypting everything. By 2020, end-to-end encryption became the standard. Signal, WhatsApp, even regular email. And then the focus of surveillance shifted to metadata, because encryption protects the content, but not the structure of communication. NYM is the current answer to this threat. It breaks the ability to analyze timings, patterns, and traffic structure. But here's what I know as a person who has studied this topic for years. Any answer is temporary. Computational power is growing. Artificial intelligence is already finding patterns in data today that are invisible to the human eye. Quantum computing, still in the development stage, is theoretically capable of breaking the cryptographic protocols that hold all modern security together. NYM developers admit they are working on post-quantum protection, but emphasize one cannot rush the implementation, as an error in execution is worse than no protection at all. And on the other side, states that are not going to give up. The European Union is discussing laws requiring platforms to scan messages for prohibited content. The United Kingdom has already passed an online safety law that calls end-to-end encryption into question. In the United States, after every high-profile incident, there are calls to limit online anonymity. The tools change, but the logic remains the same. Security versus privacy, control versus freedom. And here's what I see, looking back at everything I found over these months. The case of Andreas G. showed that Tor can be broken with patience and mathematics. Snowden's documents showed that the Global Observer is not a theory, but a reality. Pegasus and Predator showed that surveillance strikes not only at criminals, but also at those who simply ask uncomfortable questions. And NYM showed that there are people who are not going to put up with this. Harry Halpin, Claudia Diaz, Agalos Kayayas, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, hundreds of mixed node operators in over 70 countries. They're building a network where the very fact of your existence on the internet is mathematically indistinguishable from noise. Will they win? I do not know. Honestly, I do not know. The history of technology teaches one thing. Every wall built for protection sooner or later meets a battering ram built for attack. Mixed nodes today are the answer. Tomorrow, a new method of analysis will appear that bypasses mixing, and then a new answer will appear, and so on, without end. But there's one thing that sets this race apart from all the ones before it. For the first time in history, an anonymity system is not being built by the military, not by intelligence agencies, and not by the state. It is being built by scientists and civilian engineers, on open source code, on European Commission grants, on private investor money, $142 million. That is how much NYM has raised to this moment, and every line of code is open for inspection. Tor was created by the military and then set free. NYM was born free. When I started this investigation, I wanted to understand one thing: why Tor lost. Now, having finished, I realized I was asking the wrong question. Tor did not lose. Tor did what it could within the limits of the technology of its time. It provided 20 years of anonymity to millions of people: journalists, activists, whistleblowers, ordinary people who believed that their private life was their right. But the world has changed. The Watcher has become stronger. And now, a different answer is needed. NYM is the current answer. Not the last, not the final, the current one. As always, yours, Mr. Dark Web.
$96 billion. That was the amount of dirty money that passed through the exchange, which operated in the heart of Moscow, on the 46th floor of Russia's most expensive skyscraper. It was housed in the same building where two other money laundering operations had previously operated, both of which had been shut down by the FBI. The US imposed sanctions. Estonia revoked its license. Europol declared a manhunt. Yet it continued to operate for 3 years. Its founder was arrested on a beach in India. 5 months later, he was dead. And the exchange was up and running again, only this time under the cover of the authorities. My name is Mr. Darkweb, and this is the story of Garantex, the machine that cannot be shut down.
If you watched the previous video on this channel about Hydra, you'll remember how the German police, in collaboration with US intelligence agencies, shut down the platform on 5 April 2022. 17 million users, $1.5 billion in turnover in 2021 alone. Servers were seized, wallets frozen, and the market crashed tenfold in a single day. I thought then that the story was over. I was wrong. When I began to trace Hydra's financial flows, where the money went after a buyer had paid for goods, I noticed the same pattern time and time again. Money from Hydra passed through a specific exchange, a full $2.6 million. And that's just what the blockchain analytics revealed. This exchange wasn't hiding on the dark web. It didn't conceal its address. It operated in Moscow's most expensive office complex, the Federation Tower, a glass and steel skyscraper in the Moscow City Business District. And it was called Garantex.
The Federation Tower. Two glass giants, east and west, tower over Moscow. It is the 55th tallest building in the world. The rent here is so high that most legitimate companies cannot afford it. But crypto exchanges can. And here's the interesting bit. Garantex wasn't the first. Before it, Suex and Chatex, two exchange platforms that the U.S. Treasury Department had placed on sanctions lists for money laundering, had been operating from the same building. Suex was sanctioned in September 2021. Chatex followed in November of the same year. Both platforms served ransomware groups and darknet markets. Both operated from the Federation, and both were shut down. But Garantex remained, as if nothing had happened. To understand how this is possible, we need to go back to 2019, autumn. Three men register a company in Estonia, Garantex Europe OU. The first is Stanislav Drugalev, a technical specialist from Moscow, a graduate of Moscow State University, and a former owner of a telecommunications company. The second is Sergei Mendeleev, a former municipal councillor for the Yasenevo district in Moscow, a well-known figure in Russian crypto circles. The third is Alexander Miraserda, also known as Entifo Siao, a commercial director with a passport in which his name has been changed more than once. At the time, Estonia was a haven for crypto startups, a digital state, e-residency, minimal regulation. Getting a license to deal in virtual currencies was easier than setting up a shawarma stall. And in 2020, Garantex obtained that license, a legitimate business, on paper. But in practice, things turned out quite differently. An office in Moscow, clients in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The scheme was simple and ingenious in its audacity. Imagine this. You have rubles that you cannot transfer abroad. The banks are under sanctions. SWIFT is down. Official channels are closed. You walk into the Garantex office in the Federation Tower. You place your cash on the table. You receive the equivalent in stablecoins, usually USDT, pegged to the dollar, into your crypto wallet. You can then exchange these stablecoins for any currency in the world via Garantex's network of partners in Dubai, Thailand, Turkey, and Hong Kong. No traces in Russian banks. No questions asked. 100 million rubles per transaction, please. The entire process left virtually no traceable records. Transactions took place within the Garantex network of agents spread across various countries. To withdraw money onto a card, one could use Sberbank, Tinkoff, or Alpha Bank. All three, incidentally, are also subject to Western sanctions. A vicious circle in which some sanctioned entities served others. When the pandemic struck, the crypto market soared. People were stuck at home, money was pouring into digital assets, and Garantex grew alongside the market. But unlike traditional exchanges, its clients weren't just traders and investors. It attracted people who weren't usually in the habit of asking questions. I spent weeks gathering information from open sources, blockchain analytics, and investigative reports. And the deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. Garantex wasn't just helping people circumvent sanctions. It was the financial backbone of an entire criminal ecosystem. Money from ransomware groups that had paralyzed hospitals and schools flowed through it. Conti, nearly $6 million. Ryuk, $2.3 million. Revenues from darknet markets trading in drugs and stolen data also flowed through it. Millions linked to terrorist organizations, from Palestinian Islamic Jihad to Hezbollah, passed through it. And even the North Korean hacking group Lazarus Group, which was behind the $1.5 billion hack of the Bybit crypto exchange, used Garantex to launder some of the funds, according to the investigation. A report by Chainalysis, a company specializing in blockchain analysis, revealed the scale of the operation. By 2022, more than $645 million in cryptocurrency had passed through Garantex from dirty or suspicious addresses. And these were only the transactions that could be traced. But until a certain point, only analysts and the security services were aware of this. To the general public, Garantex was simply another cryptocurrency exchange, one of thousands. Legal on paper, but virtually invisible in practice. And then one of its founders died. What happened after his death revealed the true nature of this machine. On 7 February 2021, Stanislav Drugalov's body was found in Dubai. He had fallen from a bridge at a road junction. He was 40 years old. The Dubai police have not provided a clear explanation. There was no press conference. There was no public statement. Drugalov's wife later stated that she believed his death to be the result of a crime. Drugalov's personal belongings and electronic devices have disappeared. Someone demanded a ransom from his wife for their return. She did not pay. But to understand why Drugalov ended up in Dubai, we need to rewind a few months. September 2020, Moscow. Armed, masked officers storm into Drugalov's flat. This is no random raid. The Russian security services want one specific thing from him: information about the criminal gangs that use Garantex. Drugalov agrees to cooperate. He hands over the data and buys his freedom, and then he flees to Dubai. Exactly what he said remains unknown, but someone apparently decided that he had said too much, or that he might have revealed even more. Some sources believe he was killed to prevent information from leaking to the US authorities. Others believe it was a warning to those still working for the company. We will probably never know the truth. The Dubai police closed the case without making any public comments. But here's what we know for certain. 2 months after Drugalov's death, Garantex's management met with representatives of the FSB, Russia's Federal Security Service. According to available information, the purpose of the meeting was to disclose information about the exchange's users. Exactly what was agreed upon remained behind closed doors, but the outcome of this meeting became apparent very quickly. And this is what happened next. 2 weeks after Drugalov's death, changes began to take place in Garantex's corporate documents. Subtle, but radical. Sergei Mendeleev, the second founder, has disappeared from the list of shareholders. His place has been taken by a certain Irina Chernyavskaya, a former employee of the tax office. No business experience, no public office. But there was one important detail in Chernyavskaya's background. She was Pavel Karavatsky's partner. Karavatsky is in a league of his own. He is a Russian businessman with long-standing ties to companies controlled by the Kremlin. In 2017, he was on the board of directors of Peresvetbank when it came under the control of the state-owned oil company Rosneft. Around the same time, former FSB general Oleg Feoktistov became an advisor to the bank's president. He is the man believed to have orchestrated the criminal case against former economy minister Alexei Ulyukayev. Can you grasp the scale of this? We started with a cryptocurrency exchange in Estonia and ended up with the FSB, Rosneft, and the people who decide the fate of ministers. But that is not all. An investigation by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, in collaboration with an Estonian newspaper, uncovered another detail. Karavatsky and Mira Serd were co-owners of Fintech Corporation, which managed the Garantex app in Russian app stores. And this same Fintech owned half of the debt collection agency Academy of Conflicts, jointly with Alexander Tsarapkin, a convicted gang leader who received a 7-year sentence for extortion. A cryptocurrency exchange, a former FSB general, a state-owned oil company, a convicted gangster. Everything converged at a single point, the 14th floor of the Federation Vostok Tower. And do you know what's most remarkable? Once Chernyavskaya had replaced Mendeleev in the documents, the mask shows at the Garantex office came to an end.
One of the traders working on the exchange at the time later told Russian investigative journalists from Dossier, the SWAT team would turn up regularly, and everyone was made to lie face down on the floor. Cashiers, clients, everyone in sight. And then, in the spring or summer of 2021, it stopped abruptly. A coincidence? Perhaps. But I don't believe in coincidences on that scale. By the start of 2022, Garantex was no longer the exchange that three entrepreneurs had founded in Estonia. It had become something else, something bigger, and something far more dangerous.
On 22 February, the Estonian Financial Intelligence Unit carried out an inspection. The results were disastrous. In 90% of cases, Garantex had not verified the identities of its customers at all. Not a single report of suspicious activity had been filed. Estonian investigators discovered direct links between Garantex wallets and those used for criminal activities. The license was revoked on 24 February. On that very day, the world heard very different news from Russia.
But losing its license changed nothing. Garantex carried on operating as if the Estonian regulators did not exist. The company was renamed Kihonzi Bujaga OU and put into liquidation, but this was merely a legal shell. The brand, the infrastructure, the clients, everything remained in place. Because by that point, Garantex no longer needed Estonia, nor licenses, nor a legal front. Its servers, its wallets, its operations, everything was already inside Russia. And inside Russia, no one was going to touch it. And then Washington stepped in. But what happened following the US sanctions baffled even seasoned analysts. Garantex didn't just survive, it tripled its turnover and became the most brazen crypto exchange on the planet. On 5 April 2022, the US Department of the Treasury took action. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, added Garantex to its sanctions list. On the same day, a blow was dealt to Hydra. Two pillars of Russia's criminal crypto economy were brought down simultaneously. Hydra collapsed. Garantex was set to collapse next. It didn't collapse. To understand why, we need to look at how sanctions against crypto exchanges actually work. When OFAC adds a company to its list, all US citizens and companies are required to cease all dealings with it. Banks freeze accounts. Payment systems cut off access. Major crypto exchanges such as Binance and Coinbase block wallets linked to the sanctioned platform. For any normal company, this spells death, instant death.
But Garantex was no ordinary company. It had no accounts in US banks. It had no assets on US soil. It was not reliant on the Western financial infrastructure. Its servers were located in Russia. Its clients were in Russia. Its money circulated within a system that had already been cut off from the West since February 2022. In essence, the sanctions fell flat. And then something happened that nobody had expected. Instead of closing down, Garantex began to grow. On 22 July, 3 months after the sanctions, the exchange's monthly turnover tripled, reaching $865 million. By way of comparison, prior to the sanctions, it had hovered around $300 million. The sanctions did not weaken Garantex. They turned it into a monopoly. The logic was simple and cynical. When major exchanges began blocking Russian users, when Visa and MasterCard withdrew from Russia, and when SWIFT cut Russian banks off, millions of people were left with a single question: how could they get their money out? And Garantex provided the answer. It became the sole bridge between the ruble economy and the global financial system. Not for ordinary citizens, of course, for those whose sums began with 6 zeros. Data from Chainalysis revealed the scale of the situation. In 2023, Garantex processed transactions worth over $60 billion. 82% of all cryptocurrency volumes linked to sanctioned organizations worldwide passed through a single exchange, Garantex. 82%. One exchange. That's no mistake. It's a money laundering monopoly. On 22 October, an incident occurred that perfectly illustrates the whole situation.
Armed police stormed the Garantex office in the Federation Tower. The staff were forced to lie on the floor. Computers were seized. The office was sealed off. It seemed that this time things were serious. The next day, Garantex was back in business, as if nothing had happened. Same address, same services, same clients. What was that all about? A token raid for the sake of appearances? An attempt to seize data rather than shut down the business? Or simply a show for Western observers? I don't know. But the fact remains, after that raid, the exchange didn't miss a single working day. I spoke to people from the crypto community who were using Garantex at the time. One of them told me that on the day of the raid, a brief message appeared on the exchange's Telegram channel. Technical maintenance, will be back soon. No panic, no explanations. And the next morning, as usual, the latest exchange rates appeared, as if nothing had happened the day before. People in the chat joked, "Drills again." For Garantex customers, police raids had become something of a natural disaster, unpleasant but temporary. By 2023, Garantex felt untouchable. It advertised openly on Telegram. It held meetings with clients in Moscow restaurants. Its representatives gave interviews to Russian crypto publications. Sergei Mendeleev, who had formerly left the company, continued to speak at conferences as the founder of Garantex, and openly criticized Western sanctions, calling them illegitimate. He claimed that the exchange operated in full compliance with Russian law and that US sanctions had no legal force within Russia. Formally, he was right, and that perhaps is the most frightening part of the whole story. Garantex didn't give a damn about the whole world. 3 years, out in the open, and the world seemed to just stand by and watch. Analysts at Chainalysis recorded every transaction. They published reports. They cited figures. But nothing changed. The exchange carried on operating. Customers kept coming. The money kept flowing. Formally, he was right. And that perhaps is the most frightening part of the whole story. Garantex didn't give a damn about the whole world. 3 years, out in the open. And the world seemed to just stand by and watch. Analysts at Chainalysis recorded every transaction. They published reports. They cited figures. But nothing changed. The exchange carried on operating. Customers kept coming. The money kept flowing. I found discussions on dark web forums dating back to the autumn of 2022. Sellers from the former Hydra, Mega, and Blacksprout platforms openly recommended Garantex to newcomers. One of them wrote, "This is the only place where you can safely exchange crypto for rubles without verification." Another added, "They're still operating even after the sanctions, so their protection is reliable." The word protection cropped up constantly in these discussions, and every time it was written without quotation marks. By 2024, Garantex had become so brazen that it began openly offering services to help corporate clients circumvent sanctions, not to small traders, to companies. According to available data, payments for parallel imports, for the supply of dual-use technologies, and for circumventing export restrictions passed through the exchange. It became more than just a money laundering operation for hackers. It became the financial infrastructure for an entire parallel economy. But behind every dollar that passed through that exchange were people, real people. And not all of them were criminals. Some of them were victims. And it was their story that changed my attitude towards this investigation. In September 2020, the computer system at the University Hospital in Dusseldorf stopped working. 30 servers were encrypted. The same message appeared on every screen. Pay the ransom, get the key. The hackers from the group using the Doppelpaymer virus were not targeting the hospital. They wanted to attack the university, but they hit the clinic instead. That night, a woman in critical condition was admitted to A&E. The systems were down. The doctors couldn't access her medical records. They couldn't carry out any diagnostic tests. They couldn't prescribe any treatment. An ambulance took her to another hospital, 30 kilometers away. She didn't make it. She died on the way. This was the first documented case in which a ransomware attack resulted in a fatality. The first, but by no means the last.
When the German Public Prosecutor's Office launched an investigation, the hackers backed down. Realizing they had targeted a hospital rather than a university, they sent the decryption key free of charge. But it was already too late. The woman was dead. And the investigators were faced with a question that, until that moment, had been purely theoretical. Could a hacker be charged with murder? The case was eventually closed as they were unable to prove a direct causal link between the attack and her death. But a precedent had been set. In Alabama, in 2021, a baby was born in a hospital that was under a ransomware attack at the time. The monitoring systems were not working. The medical staff did not receive critical data on the fetus's condition. The child was born with severe brain damage and died 9 months later. The mother took legal action. This became the first lawsuit in history to link a patient's death to a cyber attack. As I was reading through this material, one thing kept coming to mind. The money the hackers received from these attacks didn't simply vanish into thin air. It passed through specific channels, through specific wallets, through specific exchanges. And Garantex was one of the key hubs in this system. The figures I found in the reports speak for themselves. In 2023, Russian-speaking ransomware groups earned at least $500 million in cryptocurrency. That is 69% of all global ransomware revenue for that year. More than 2/3 of all ransoms paid worldwide went to Russian-speaking hackers. And a significant portion of that money passed through Garantex. Conti, one of the most aggressive cybercriminal groups in history, laundered nearly $6 million through Garantex. Conti has attacked hospitals, school districts, and local authorities. In May 2021, they paralyzed Ireland's healthcare system, the entire country. It took several months to restore services and cost 100 million euros. Ryuk, the predecessor to Conti, funneled a full 2.3 million through Garantex. Lockbit, Black Basta, and dozens of other groups used the exchange as a money laundering service. The scheme was honed to perfection. The victim pays the ransom in bitcoins. The bitcoins are transferred to a mixer or an exchange. From there, they end up on Garantex. Garantex converts them into USDT or rubles. The money is clean. All traces are erased. And here's the key point to understand. These groups weren't just operating somewhere. They existed within an ecosystem where Garantex was the central element. Without a reliable channel for laundering money, the ransomware business cannot function. What's the point of demanding a ransom if you can't convert cryptocurrency into real money? Garantex solved this problem. It was the final link in the chain that turned digital blackmail into real rubles, dollars, and euros. Without it, dozens of groups would have been left with a pile of bitcoins that they couldn't spend. But the ransomware was only part of the picture. And, to be honest, by no means the most frightening part. In December 2024, the UK's National Crime Agency, NCA, published the results of Operation Destabilization. It was one of the largest international investigations into financial crime. 26 arrests, links to more than 30 countries, hundreds of millions of dollars in trace transactions. And this is what they found. Garantex was not the only company operating in the Federation Tower. The building also housed the offices of Smart Group and TGR Group, which formed a vast money laundering network. These companies served Colombian drug cartels, the Irish Kinahan clan, the Conti and Ryuk ransomware groups, and, according to the NCA, the Russian security services. All under one roof, on different floors, like a shopping center for money laundering. The NCA has established that hundreds of millions of pounds have passed through this network. Money from drug trafficking in South America was converted into cryptocurrency, passed through Garantex and its associated exchanges, and then withdrawn as cash via couriers in the UK, France, and Spain. At the same time, the same infrastructure was used to fund Russian espionage in Europe. Think about this for a moment. Colombian cocaine, the Irish mafia, North Korean hackers, Palestinian militants, Russian spies. They all used the same washing machine.
And that machine was located in one of Moscow's most expensive skyscrapers, just a few kilometers from the Kremlin, out in the open, with a sign, with an advert on Telegram. When I pieced all these threads together, I realized one thing. Garantex wasn't just an exchange. It was a crossroads where the interests of hackers, drug traffickers, terrorists, and intelligence agencies converged. They all used the same infrastructure. They all depended on the same machine. And they all felt safe because the machine was located in a country that had no intention of shutting it down. I thought this story would never end, that Garantex would operate forever, like some invulnerable mechanism that is subject to neither the law, nor sanctions, nor common sense. But at the start of 2025, everything changed. For the first time in history, the European Union imposed sanctions on specific crypto addresses belonging to Garantex. This set a precedent. Previously, sanctions had been imposed on companies, individuals, and countries. Now, lines of code on the blockchain were being sanctioned. Meanwhile, in Washington, the U.S. Secret Service, together with the FBI and European partners, was preparing an operation from which Garantex would never recover. At least, that is what everyone thought. On 6 March 2025, Garantex ceased to exist for 24 hours. A few weeks earlier, in February, the European Union did something it had never done before. As part of its 16th package of sanctions against Russia, the EU blacklisted specific crypto addresses for the first time. Not a company, not a person, but lines of code on the blockchain. Thousands of addresses belonging to Garantex were frozen by a single decision. It was a signal. Europe was no longer going to wait. Meanwhile, in Washington, everything was already in place by then. The operation began simultaneously in several countries. The U.S. Secret Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the German Federal Criminal Police Office, BKA, and the Finnish police carried out a coordinated raid. Garantex's domains were seized. A familiar screen appeared on the website's homepage, the logos of the security agencies and a notice of seizure. Servers in Germany and Finland were seized. $26 million in cryptocurrency has been frozen in wallets controlled by law enforcement. And that was only the first blow. On the same day, Tether, the issuer of the largest stablecoin, USDT, froze a further $27 million in wallets linked to Garantex. For an exchange that had built its business model around USDT for years, this was a knockout blow. Not a technical glitch, not a temporary problem, a complete freeze on its primary instrument. On 7 March, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed charges against 2 individuals. The first, Alexei Beshakov, a Russian national, is also known by the alias Proforg. According to the investigation, he managed the technical side of Garantex and was the administrator of one of the oldest Russian-language cybercriminal forums which had been in existence since the early 2000s. The second is Alexander Miraserda, the very same third founder with the name on his passport that kept changing. He is a Lithuanian national. According to the FBI, he was responsible for the commercial side of operations and coordinated a network of agents across several countries. The charges were serious: conspiracy to launder money, breach of sanctions, dealing with an unlicensed money-lending business. Each charge carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. By that point, Miraserd was in the United Arab Emirates. The U.S. had offered a reward of $5 million for information leading to his arrest. He went into hiding. At the time of writing this investigation, his whereabouts are unknown. Beshkov, however, was less fortunate. Or, judging by what happened next, he was even less fortunate than it seems. On 12 March 2025, Alexei Beshkov was arrested in India, the town of Varkala in the state of Kerala, a resort town on the coast of the Indian Ocean. Beshkov had traveled there with his family on holiday. According to Indian media reports, the arrest took place at the request of the U.S. via Interpol.
Beshtakov did not expect to be detained. He was not in hiding. He was sunbathing. This is a telling detail. A man wanted by the FBI and the Secret Service, a man facing charges under several federal statutes, was calmly traveling around India with his family. He wasn't on the run, not on forged documents. He felt safe. Either he was unaware of the scale of what was being planned, or he believed that no one would touch him outside U.S. jurisdiction. He was wrong. The Indian authorities placed him in a local prison pending a decision on his extradition to the United States. The process promised to be a long one. India is known for its protracted legal proceedings, particularly in extradition cases. But Beshokov had no time to wait. Meanwhile, Garantex took desperate measures. On the day the domains were seized, the exchange published a statement to clients on Telegram. The management announced that it was aware of the situation and was working on a recovery. Clients were invited to visit the Moscow office in person to resolve issues regarding frozen funds. Face-to-face meetings at the Moscow office, after the FBI and the Secret Service had seized the servers. A brazenness that inspired both admiration and horror. Some customers did indeed turn up. According to reporters from Dossier, in the days following the takeover, a queue formed outside the office in the Federation Tower, made up of people trying to get their money back. Some brought laptops with their wallets open to prove their balances. Others asked to exchange USDT for cash rubles on the spot. The office was open, people were coming in, as if nothing had happened, as if the FBI existed in some parallel reality that had nothing to do with the Moscow skyscraper. But reality caught up with everyone. Without access to domains, with frozen wallets and no USDT, the exchange could no longer operate as before. Transactions ground to a halt. Trading volumes plummeted to zero. Garantex, which had been thumbing its nose at sanctions for 3 years, finally fell silent. At least under that name. Because on 31 August 2025, the world learned 2 things at once. First, Alexei Beshokov is dead. Second, Garantex is up and running again. Cut off one head, and 2 more grow back. Garantex has literally proven this. On 31 August 2025, an anonymous Telegram channel linked to the Garantex Circle published a message stating that Alexei Beshokov had died in an Indian prison. The cause of death was not specified. The circumstances are unknown. The channel claimed that Beshokov died shortly after allegedly agreeing to be extradited to the United States. He agreed to be extradited, and then he died. The Indian authorities have not issued a public statement. There was no press conference. There was no independent forensic examination. There was no post-mortem whose findings were made available to the press. A man who could have testified against an entire network, against the people behind Garantex, against schemes worth tens of billions of dollars, has simply ceased to exist. In a prison cell, thousands of kilometers from Moscow and Washington. His lawyer stated that he would seek an investigation. At the time of writing, there are no results. I won't jump to conclusions about what happened. I have no evidence. But I can't help but notice a pattern. Dugalev died in Dubai when he knew too much. Beshokov died in India when he was ready to speak out. 2 key figures, 2 key moments, 2 deaths with no explanation. But even before Beshokov's death, Garantex had already begun to recover, and this is how it happened. Back on 25 March, just a few days after the domains were seized, advertisements for a new platform began appearing on Telegram channels. Grinex, a different name. The interface is the same colors, the same structure, the same services. Garantex customers were offered the chance to transfer their balances to Grinex without any loss. The administration promised that all funds were safe. All they had to do was go through the migration process. On 14 August 2025, 2 weeks before Beshokov's death, the U.S. Department of the Treasury struck again. OFAC added Grinex to its sanctions list. At the same time, entities linked to Garantex were sanctioned once again. The State Department offered a reward of up to $6 million for information on Grinex executives. $6 million! That is more than was offered for Mira Cerd. But Grinex carried on operating. Because by that point, the people behind the company had developed something new, something that made them even less vulnerable to Western sanctions. They have created their own stablecoin, A7A5. The idea was simple and, in its own way, elegant. USD is controlled by Tether, a company that bows to US pressure and can freeze wallets. Garantex had already got a taste of this, so they needed their own currency that no one could freeze. A7A5 was pegged to the Russian ruble and operated within a closed ecosystem. According to Chainalysis, by mid-2025, transactions worth over 100 billion rubles had passed through A7A5. Can you grasp the scale of it? The team at Garantex had effectively created an alternative financial system, their own currency, their own payment network, their own rules. All of this operated in parallel with the global economy, but outside its boundaries, without SWIFT, without Visa, without oversight. A tool created specifically to bypass the entire Western financial infrastructure. And it worked.
Alongside Grinex, other platforms have also emerged: XVED, MCanCoin, and a network of exchange agents in Dubai, Thailand, and Hong Kong. What used to be a single exchange has become a decentralized system. It's a veritable hydra: cut off one head and 3 more grow back. But on 15 April 2026, something happened that no one had anticipated. Grinex was hacked. $13.7 million vanished from the platform's wallets. The Grinex administration immediately blamed Western intelligence agencies and claimed that this was a targeted operation to destroy the platform. They published a lengthy statement on Telegram, full of patriotic rhetoric and accusations against the CIA and the NSA. Analysts at Chainalysis were skeptical of this version of events. They noted that the nature of the hack was more consistent with the work of an insider or a competitor than a state-sponsored operation. The movement of funds did not match the methods typically used by intelligence agencies. It was more likely to be someone with inside knowledge of the system.
Following the hack, Grinex announced it was ceasing operations. Customers were promised a refund, but by that point, trust had been undermined. Not by sanctions, not by the security services, but by the most commonplace phenomenon in the world of cryptocurrency: theft. I want you to think about this. Garantex operated from 2019 to 2025, 6 years. Over those 6 years, tens of billions of dollars passed through it. It survived sanctions, the loss of its license, police raids, domain seizures, and the arrest of its executives. And every time it came back, under a different name, with a different interface, but with the same essence. 2 people who knew how it worked from the inside are dead. One fell from a bridge in Dubai. The other died in an Indian prison. The man who coordinated the commercial operations is still wanted. There is a $5 million bounty on his head. The nominal founder speaks freely at conferences in Moscow. In its 25th annual report, Transparency International stated quite clearly, Garantex has not disappeared. It has reorganized itself into a decentralized system that is harder to detect and even harder to shut down. And here's what's been bothering me. In the 6 years since Garantex was established, the Russian authorities have never made a serious attempt to shut it down. Not a single criminal case. Not a single arrest on Russian soil. The only raid, on 22nd October, came to nothing. The exchange, through which money from terrorists, hackers, and drug traffickers flowed, operated in the heart of the capital, in a skyscraper visible from the windows of the Kremlin. It operated openly, with advertising, with queues of customers. I won't say why. Everyone can draw their own conclusions. When I began this investigation, I thought I was telling the story of a single exchange, a single brazen, audacious, lawless platform that couldn't care less about the rest of the world. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This is not the story of a single exchange. It is the story of a system in which criminal money, state interests, and technology are so tightly intertwined that it is impossible to cut through it. One can only cut off what sticks out. The roots remain. Garantex is dead. Grinex is dead. But the machine keeps running, under a different name, in a different guise, with a different interface. And as long as there is demand for anonymous transfers, as long as there are countries willing to turn a blind eye, as long as there are people for whom $96 billion is more important than the life of a woman who didn't make it to the hospital in Dusseldorf, this machine will keep running. It was Mr. Dark Web. Keep your data safe. And your money too, especially if someone promises you that it's safe.